Drunk outlaw wins Chinese girl in poker game. Sobered instantly when she says his mother's last words. Ethan stumbled through the dusty streets of the small border town, the sun setting behind jagged mountains, casting long shadows over the worn buildings. His boots, scuffed and cracked, made soft thuds against the uneven wooden planks of the sidewalks. The town smelled faintly of smoke, fried food, and wet earth. Children ran by, kicking a tattered ball, laughing and shouting, while merchants called out from open doorways, selling fruits, vegetables, and cheap trinkets. Ethan barely noticed them. His mind was foggy, his thoughts muddled from a day of drinking, and he barely remembered how he had ended up here. He had been wandering from town to town for months, never staying in one place long enough to make friends or find work. His reputation as a small-time outlaw preceded him wherever he went. Some people called him reckless, others just called him trouble. And trouble was exactly what Ethan had become. He had spent his days drinking, gambling, and picking fights, avoiding the world that seemed too heavy to face. His family had been gone for years, leaving only faint memories and his mother's words echoing somewhere deep inside him, words he had long forgotten. Tonight, though, something had drawn him to the center of the town, the gambling hall. Its windows glowed with warm yellow light, spilling out into the street like a beacon. Laughter and the clatter of dice and chips could be heard even before Ethan pushed the heavy wooden door open. The smell of smoke and strong tea hit him immediately, mixed with the sharper scent of coins and tension. People at the tables were leaning forward, eyes fixed on the cards in their hands. Their faces were a mix of excitement, worry, and determination. Ethan shuffled toward an empty chair at one of the poker tables. He didn't have much money left, but gambling was what he did best, at least when he was drunk enough to stop thinking too much. The players around him glanced at him, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. A few laughed quietly among themselves, assuming this was just another drunk outsider who would lose everything quickly. Ethan, however, had a strange kind of luck and a recklessness that sometimes paid off in the most unexpected ways. He took a seat and ordered a cup of strong tea, the warmth calming him slightly. As the dealer began to shuffle, Ethan looked around the room. The walls were decorated with faded paintings of past winners and old tournaments, each telling a story of luck and skill, of triumph and regret. The air was thick with smoke, and the sounds of shuffling cards and murmured bets created a rhythm that made Ethan feel strangely alive, more awake than he had in days. At the table across from him sat a young woman, quiet and composed. She had a calm presence that seemed to contrast with the chaotic energy of the other players. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her eyes were sharp, attentive, observing everything around her. She was a visitor in the town, traveling with her family, but tonight she was part of the game, her posture relaxed yet confident. She wasn't just lucky. Ethan could tell, even in his foggy state, that she was clever and skilled, someone who understood the subtle dance of poker. Ethan took his first sip of tea, grimacing at its strength. His hands shook slightly. Not entirely from nerves, but from the alcohol still coursing through his veins. He had made a lot of mistakes in his life, many of them because of drinking and careless decisions. But tonight, he told himself, he was just going to play the game, nothing more. The dealer dealt the cards, and Ethan squinted at his hand, trying to focus. He wasn't sure if he had anything good, but he shrugged it off. In the world of gambling, confidence often mattered more than the cards themselves. As the first round began, Ethan made a bold move. He pushed all his chips forward, more from instinct than strategy. The other players blinked in surprise. Some laughed quietly, thinking he was joking. But when the young woman across from him matched his bet without hesitation, Ethan felt a flicker of curiosity. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't scared. and that, in some strange way, challenged him. The room seemed to quiet slightly, all eyes on the table as the game continued. Ethan's mind, muddled by drink, began to clear just enough to notice the subtle tells of the other players, the slight twitch of a finger, the nervous glance, the way someone pushed their chips forward with too much force. He realized, even in his intoxicated state, that he could read people better when he let go of overthinking. Luck might have brought him here, but observation would help him survive. The game went on, the tension building with each hand. Ethan felt the familiar rush of excitement, the adrenaline of risk, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could win something for once. He wasn't thinking about the money yet, he was thinking about the challenge. Beating these people, matching their skills, surviving the night without falling into his usual chaos. That felt like a victory in itself. Meanwhile, the young woman continued to watch him carefully. She didn't speak much, but her eyes followed every move he made, measuring him, calculating. Ethan felt a strange mixture of irritation and respect. Irritation because she was calm and collected while he was stumbling through life, and respect because she was clearly intelligent and composed, the kind of person who didn't let circumstances dictate her actions. By the time the first hour had passed, Ethan had won several hands. His reckless strategy, combined with a bit of luck and his ability to read people, allowed him to accumulate chips steadily. He laughed quietly to himself, a rough, almost harsh sound, realizing that for once, things were going his way. The other players began to take him more seriously, some frowning, some shifting uneasily in their seats. Ethan noticed it but didn't let it bother him. He was on his own path tonight, a path that, for once, didn't feel entirely doomed. Outside, the last light of day faded, and the town's lamps flickered to life. The streets grew quieter, except for the occasional call from a vendor or the distant sound of children playing. Inside the hall, the atmosphere grew more intense as bets became larger, hands riskier. Ethan felt a strange clarity amid the chaos, a moment where the alcohol faded enough that he could focus, yet not so much that fear or doubt crept back in. He was in the middle of a storm, both inside and out, and he felt alive. As another round began, he glanced at the young woman again. Something about her calm presence, her quiet focus, seemed to anchor him, even if he didn't fully understand why. He had spent so long drifting, ignoring people, running from responsibility, and yet here was someone who could match him, who could challenge him without shouting or fighting. Ethan realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that he might not be completely alone in the world. The dealer pushed the cards toward them, and Ethan picked up his hand, squinting to see the numbers. He smiled faintly, feeling the familiar thrill of risk, the excitement of chance. The game was far from over, and the night had just begun, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt that life might still hold something unexpected, something worth facing. The shadows of the town, the warmth of the hall, the quiet presence of the young woman, all of it created a strange mixture of fear, hope, and possibility. And in that moment, Ethan, the wandering outlaw, the drunkard with nothing but mistakes behind him, felt something he hadn't in years. Anticipation. Not just for the game, but for the unknown path ahead, the choices he would make, and the small, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find something worth holding on to in a world that had long seemed indifferent. Ethan had never felt so alive. The warmth of the gambling hall, the clatter of chips, the scent of strong tea and smoke, it all made him feel as if he belonged somewhere, even if only for this night. He pushed back the fog of alcohol just enough to focus on the game, though he still felt the familiar looseness in his limbs. Each hand of poker brought a new wave of adrenaline, and he could feel the eyes of the other players on him. Some watched with suspicion, others with amusement, as if they were waiting for him to stumble and fall. But Ethan had learned over the years that chaos could be turned into advantage if he could remain unpredictable. The young woman across from him, Leanne, did not flinch at his erratic bets. She was calm, observing every motion he made, every twitch of his hands, every glance at the cards. Ethan noticed her keen eyes, and for the first time in many nights, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt challenged. Most people in his life had either ignored him or feared him. Leanne, however, seemed completely immune to both fear and judgment. She was focused solely on the game, and that drew Ethan in, pulling him out of his drunken haze more than anything else in the room. The first round of the new hand began with small bets, and Ethan played loosely, pushing chips forward almost at random. He could feel the other players tensing. One older man with a lined face and gray hair shook his head and muttered under his breath, clearly frustrated by Ethan's unpredictability. Another player, a young man with nimble fingers and quick eyes, glanced at Ethan suspiciously, trying to read him, but Ethan's face gave nothing away. He had long ago learned the art of hiding his intentions, of making people doubt themselves while he quietly planned his next move. As the cards were dealt, Ethan squinted, trying to make sense of his hand. It wasn't particularly strong, but that didn't matter. In poker, sometimes the power of bluffing could outweigh the strength of the cards. Ethan leaned back, letting a lazy smile creep across his face, pretending he had a perfect hand. His casual confidence made others nervous. Leanne, however, remained completely still, her expression calm, unreadable. Ethan could feel the subtle tension in the air. The room seemed to shrink, the noise fading into the background, leaving only the rhythm of the game. He decided to take a risk. Ethan pushed all of his remaining chips into the center of the table. The clatter of the chips was loud in the quiet of the room, and several players froze. A few laughed, assuming it was the drunken antics of a man who had no idea what he was doing. But Leanne's hand didn't move. She leaned slightly forward, considering her own cards, then, without hesitation, matched his bet. Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. She was not intimidated. She was not afraid. And in that moment, Ethan realized that this young woman was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. The room seemed to hold its breath. Whispers floated among the other players, but no one dared speak too loudly. Ethan's mind raced. His heart pounded, and a part of him wanted to laugh, to throw caution to the wind, to enjoy the chaos he had created. But another part of him felt a strange respect for Leanne. She was clever, patient, and daring. She wasn't just playing the game. She was challenging him directly, testing him, and he knew he had to respond in kind. Ethan studied her closely, trying to find a hint, a tell, anything that could give him an advantage. He noticed the way she held her cards, the slight tightening of her fingers when she considered a risk, the subtle flick of her eyes toward the dealer. She was calm but attentive, focused but not rigid. Ethan realized that her skill was not in luck, but in observation, in reading the people around her. It reminded him of himself when he had been younger, before life had hardened him and the years of mistakes had taken their toll. The next card was dealt, and Ethan felt a surge of excitement. He had a decent hand now, but the game was no longer about luck. It was about nerve, strategy, and presence. He smiled again, pushing a few more chips forward, testing her resolve. Leanne's eyes flicked to his hand, then back to the dealer, and she calmly added more chips to the pot. Ethan felt a thrill of admiration and irritation at the same time. He had never met anyone who could keep pace with his erratic style while remaining so composed. Other players began to sweat under the pressure. The older man muttered complaints, the younger man fidgeted with his chips, and a few spectators had gathered near the windows, watching the game with wide eyes. Ethan could feel the attention turning toward him. In past games, he had often been overlooked or underestimated, but tonight, he was at the center. The stakes had grown, the tension thickened, and the game had become a test of courage as much as skill. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. He had made many mistakes in his life, but for once he felt clarity. His mind, sharpened by the thrill of risk and the unexpected challenge before him, worked in ways it hadn't for years. He noticed the subtle movements of the dealer, the way chips were stacked, the expressions that flickered across the faces of those around the table. Each small detail was a clue, and Ethan was learning to read them all. Leanne, for her part, remained a mystery. Her calm, silent demeanor made it difficult for Ethan to anticipate her next move. Yet that uncertainty only fueled his excitement. He had spent so long drifting, drinking, and avoiding responsibility, but here, at this table, he felt alive in a way that had been missing for years. Every decision mattered. Every action had consequences. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt fully present. As the final card of the round was dealt, Ethan's pulse quickened. He had a strong hand now, but the true test was not in the cards themselves. It was in how he played them. He pushed all of his chips forward once more, the clatter echoing in the hall. The room fell silent. Leon's eyes met his for the first time, and in that gaze, Ethan sensed something he had not expected. Challenge and defiance, yes, but also respect. She matched his bet again, and a murmur ran through the onlookers. The other players folded, unwilling to risk more, and the pot belonged solely to Ethan and Leon. He felt a mixture of triumph and anxiety. He had never faced an opponent like her before, someone who could match him in courage and skill, someone who refused to be intimidated by his reputation or his antics. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation, and Ethan realized that this game was no longer just about winning money. It was about proving something, to himself and to the woman across from him. For a moment, Ethan's mind drifted. He thought of his past, the mistakes, the regrets, the nights spent lost and alone. He had avoided responsibility, ignored opportunities, and numbed himself with drink. Yet here, in this small, smoky hall, he felt a spark of something he had almost forgotten: purpose. He wanted to win, yes, but not just for himself. He wanted to rise to the challenge, to meet it fully, and to see what he was capable of when he stopped running from the world. Leon studied him carefully, her calm exterior betraying nothing. She was clearly thinking several steps ahead, anticipating his moves, and Ethan felt a thrill of respect mixed with the familiar adrenaline of competition. He realized that the night had become more than a game. It was a meeting of minds, a confrontation of skill, courage, and determination. Each of them tested the other, not with words or threats, but with strategy, observation, and intuition. As the round came to a close, Ethan gathered his winnings, his heart still pounding. He had survived, and in some strange way, he felt proud. Not just proud of the money, but proud that he had engaged fully, taken risks, and felt alive in a way he had long forgotten. Leon returned his gaze, her eyes steady, acknowledging his skill and his courage, and Ethan felt a flicker of connection, however fleeting. The room slowly returned to its usual noise, the clatter of chips, the shuffle of cards, the quiet murmur of spectators, but Ethan remained focused on the young woman across from him. Something about her presence, her calm strength, had changed the tone of the night. He could feel that the game was far from over, that the stakes were about to rise even higher, and that the real challenge was only beginning. Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself for the next hand. He had never felt more alive, more focused, or more aware of the world around him. And as the dealer began to shuffle for the next round, he knew deep down that tonight could change everything, not just in the game, but in the life he had been stumbling through for so long. Ethan felt a strange excitement as the next hand began. The air in the gambling hall seemed thicker now, almost electric. The other players whispered nervously, unsure whether to challenge him further or fold and avoid the growing tension. Ethan's hands still shook slightly from the alcohol, but his mind was sharper than it had been for months. Something about Leanne, her quiet confidence and unwavering gaze, made him feel alert, focused, and alive. He could sense that this game was no longer just about winning money. It had become a test of courage, skill, and self-control. The dealer shuffled the cards carefully, and Ethan picked up his new hand. He squinted at the numbers and suits, trying to make sense of them, though he had learned long ago that in poker, the cards were only part of the story. Reading people was just as important, sometimes more so. Leanne's expression was calm, almost serene, as she studied her own hand. Ethan could feel the weight of her gaze, and for the first time he realized that he was not just facing a player. He was facing a mind as sharp as his own, a person capable of matching him move for move. Ethan decided to take a risk. He pushed a pile of chips forward, letting them clatter against the wooden table. The sound echoed in the hall, drawing the attention of everyone present. Leanne did not react immediately. Her eyes flicked to his hand, then back to the dealer. Slowly, deliberately, she added an equal amount of chips to the pot. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. She was not afraid. She was not intimidated. And in that moment, Ethan realized something that startled him even more than the game itself. He respected her. The game continued, each hand growing more intense, each bet more daring. Ethan's confidence, fueled by the thrill of risk and the unusual clarity he felt, seemed to grow with every round. Yet there was also a creeping unease inside him, a feeling that tonight was different, that something significant was about to happen. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt that the night, the town, and this game were leading him toward something he could not ignore. Leanne watched him carefully, her face calm, her eyes bright with focus. She seemed to know exactly what Ethan was thinking, even before he made a move. Each glance she gave him carried a quiet message, a reminder that the game was more than just cards. It was a challenge of wits, courage, and character. Ethan felt both frustrated and intrigued. For so long he had relied on luck, recklessness, and bravado. Now, faced with someone who could read him so clearly, he realized that he had to be more than just a drunk outlaw. He had to be present, honest, and aware. As the round reached its climax, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had a strong hand, and the chips in the pot were more than he had ever held in one place. But the true challenge was not in the cards. It was in the presence of Leanne. Across the table, calm, composed, and unyielding. She was not just playing the game. She was testing him, measuring him, and silently asking him to see himself clearly. The moment arrived when Leanne leaned slightly forward, her voice soft but clear. Ethan felt a strange shiver run through him as she spoke words he had not heard in decades. They were familiar, haunting, and impossible to forget. She said something in Chinese, a phrase that struck him with the force of a lightning bolt. Even in your darkest hours, you must never forget who you are. The words hit him like a shock. Ethan froze, his mind clearing in an instant. The alcohol, the recklessness, the bravado, All of it vanished in a flash. He could see everything with perfect clarity. The faces of the other players, the clatter of chips, the smoke in the hall, it all became crystal clear. For the first time in years, Ethan felt fully awake, fully present, and painfully aware of the life he had been avoiding. Tears welled in his eyes, and his hands trembled, not from drink, but from the sudden weight of memory and realization. Those words, his mother's last words, spoken long ago and nearly forgotten, had returned to him through the voice of a stranger. So wrought, Lian's calm presence and careful observation had reached through the haze of his life and touched something deep inside, something he had tried to bury, his conscience, his heart, and the part of him that still remembered right from wrong. The room went quiet. Even the dealer paused, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Ethan looked at Lian, and for the first time, he truly saw her. She was not a prize, not an opponent to be beaten, not a challenge to be conquered. She was a person, strong, intelligent, and brave, who had, without knowing it, reminded him of his humanity. The realization was overwhelming. He felt a mix of shame, awe, and gratitude, and he knew that the choices he had made up to this point could no longer define him. Ethan's mind raced. He remembered his mother's face, her gentle voice, the way she had always tried to guide him, even when he had been stubborn and reckless. Her words had been a lifeline in his youth, a reminder that he could rise above his mistakes. But he had ignored them, pushing them away as he drank and wandered, convincing himself that he was beyond saving. Now, hearing them again, spoken by someone he had never met, Ethan felt a sudden clarity. His life, his actions, and the path he had chosen were all his responsibility. For a long moment he could not speak. The room seemed suspended in time. The other players watched silently, unsure what had happened, while Ethan struggled to steady his breathing. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice rough and trembling. I've been a fool," he said, the words carrying both apology and confession. "I didn't see what mattered. I didn't see who I really am or who I've been hurting." Lian's expression softened slightly. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement of the truth he had just faced. Ethan could see that she understood, not just the game, but the man in front of her. For a brief moment, it felt as if the world had stopped, as if the poker hall, the town, and all its noise had faded into silence, leaving only the clarity of understanding. The other players shifted uneasily. Some murmured among themselves, but no one interrupted. Ethan knew that this was not a moment for words, but for reflection. The realization had struck him deeply, and he could feel the weight of it settling into his bones. He had won the game, but he understood now that the true victory was not in the chips, not in the money, not in the thrill of risk. It was in the awakening of his mind and spirit, in seeing the world clearly for the first time in years. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the cool clarity fill him. He looked down at the table, at the pile of chips he had won, and then back at Lian. A sense of shame mixed with gratitude washed over him. He had treated the game and perhaps life itself carelessly. But now he had been reminded of the value of integrity, the power of words, and the importance of seeing people and himself with honesty. He pushed the chips back slightly, not entirely, but enough to show that he was reconsidering. I can't accept this like this," he said quietly. "I see now that this isn't just a game. I've been a reckless fool. I need to do better." Lian studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were steady, her expression unreadable, Yet there was a spark of approval there. She had not said his mother's words lightly. She had not intended to shame or embarrass him. She had reminded him of the person he once was, and perhaps still could be. Ethan felt a wave of gratitude and humility, unlike anything he had felt in years. The silence stretched for several moments. Then, slowly, Ethan exhaled and allowed a small, genuine smile to form. It was a smile of relief, of understanding, and of the first step toward change. He had been drunk, careless, and reckless, but now, in a single instant, he had been sober in every sense that mattered. He could see his life clearly, and for the first time, he could choose the man he wanted to be. The other players resumed their quiet murmurs, but Ethan no longer noticed them. The game continued, but his mind had shifted. He was no longer playing for luck, for money, or for pride. He was playing to reclaim something he had lost: his sense of self, his conscience, and his connection to the people and world around him. As the night deepened and the hall grew darker, Ethan felt a strange peace settle over him. The moment had passed, but its impact would stay with him forever. The words of his mother, spoken by a stranger, had reached him through the fog of years and drink, awakening a part of him that he had thought lost. Ethan sat back in his chair, feeling a strange calm wash over him. The room, which had been alive with tension and excitement, seemed quieter now, almost as if the world itself had paused to watch what he would do next. The pile of chips in front of him, once a symbol of luck and recklessness, now felt heavy, almost meaningless. He could see clearly for the first time in years that the real victory was not in winning money, but in understanding himself and his choices. The other players stared at him. Some looked confused, others cautious, and a few seemed almost wary, sensing that something had shifted. Ethan's usual bravado, his drunken confidence, had vanished. In its place was a quiet strength, a presence that spoke of someone finally confronting his own life honestly. For a long moment no one moved, and the hall was filled with a strange, tense silence. Ethan looked at Leanne across the table. Her expression had softened slightly, though she remained calm and composed. He realized that she had not spoken to shame him, but to awaken him, to remind him that he was capable of more than the reckless, careless life he had been living. Now, her words, echoing his mother's final advice, had pierced through the fog of years, and now it was up to him to decide what he would do next. He pushed the chips toward her slowly, deliberately, not all at once, but enough to make his intentions clear. I can't accept this," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just a game. It's not about money."
And it's not about winning you or anyone else. I was wrong.
The hall remained quiet. The other players were watching intently, unsure how he would continue. Ethan's hands shook slightly, not from fear or drink, but from the sudden weight of responsibility and realization. He had spent so long avoiding himself, running from his past, and now he had to face it head on. Giving the chips back was the first step. Making amends, even in this small way, felt like the beginning of something he had almost forgotten: honesty and integrity. Leon's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. There was no mockery, no anger, only understanding. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement of the change she could see in him. Ethan felt a wave of relief, mixed with humility. He realized that winning the game had been nothing compared to facing himself. And now, in this quiet hall filled with the soft clatter of chips and whispered bets, he felt something he had not felt in decades: hope. The older man at the table, who had been skeptical of Ethan's abilities and reckless style, cleared his throat. You're... you're returning the chips? He asked cautiously. Why? Ethan looked at him, meeting his gaze without fear. Because winning like that would mean nothing, he said firmly. I've spent too long living carelessly, drinking and gambling, thinking that I could ignore the consequences of my actions. That ends tonight. His words hung in the air, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. The young man next to him, who had been watching with nervous energy, blinked in surprise. You're really serious? He asked. Ethan nodded. I am, he said. I need to start living differently, and I can't do that by taking what isn't rightfully mine, or treating people like objects in a game. Leanne allowed a small smile to appear, just enough to show approval. She had not expected this response, yet she understood that it was genuine. Ethan was no longer the reckless drunk outlaw who had stumbled into the hall. He was someone who had seen himself clearly for the first time in years, and he was choosing to act with integrity, even when it meant giving up the easy victory. The other players murmured quietly among themselves. Some seemed impressed, others skeptical, but all could see that something important had shifted. The tension in the room, which had been almost unbearable a few moments ago, now transformed into a quiet respect. Ethan's actions had spoken louder than any words, and everyone could feel it. Ethan pushed the last of the chips back toward Leanne. I can't take this from you. You played well, and you deserve to keep your dignity. I've made mistakes in my life, but I won't make this one. He paused, feeling the weight of every word. I want to do better. I need to. Leanne nodded again. She said nothing, but her eyes conveyed a quiet acknowledgement. She understood that Ethan had changed in that moment, not because of fear or shame, but because he had chosen to face himself. That choice, she knew, would shape the man he could become. The older man at the table shook his head slowly. I've seen a lot in my time, he said, his voice low, but I've never seen someone sober up faster than that.
You may be more than just luck, kid. Maybe this is your chance.
Ethan smiled faintly, feeling both gratitude and humility. He realized that this was more than just a game of poker. It was a turning point in his life. The night had started as another reckless gamble, another opportunity for temporary gain, but it had transformed into something much more meaningful. He had confronted himself, faced his mistakes, and taken a step toward change. The crowd outside the hall had grown, curious about the commotion inside. A few townspeople peeked through the windows, whispering among themselves. Some of them knew of Ethan's reputation, the wandering drunkard, the small-time outlaw. But tonight they saw something different. They saw a man making a conscious choice to do what was right, even when it was difficult. And in that moment, Ethan felt a small sense of pride, not for winning, but for acting honestly. He stood up slowly, still feeling the tremor of emotion in his chest. The other players watched him carefully, and he looked at each of them in turn. I've spent too long avoiding who I am, he said quietly. But tonight I see it clearly. And I'll start living differently, starting now. Leanne watched him with quiet approval. She had not expected him to react this way, but she understood that the words he had just heard, the words of his mother, echoed through her voice, had unlocked something inside him. Ethan was no longer a man lost to recklessness and drink. He was someone capable of change, someone who could choose a better path. The older man nodded slowly. It's not easy to see yourself clearly, he said, but when you do, it can change everything. You've taken the first step. Don't forget it. Ethan felt the truth of those words deep inside him. He had wasted so many years on mistakes and poor choices, but now he had an opportunity to start over, to make amends, and to live with integrity. The chips on the table, once a symbol of luck and risk, now seemed trivial compared to the awakening he had experienced. The young man next to him, who had been skeptical, looked at Ethan differently now. I didn't expect this," he said quietly. "I thought you were just another gambler. But,
Maybe there's more to you. Ethan nodded, understanding.
It wasn't about proving himself to anyone else. It was about proving it to himself. For the first time in many years, Ethan felt a sense of calm determination. The night had tested him in ways he had not expected, but he had risen to the challenge. He had confronted himself, faced his past, and taken the first steps toward becoming the man he wanted to be. And for the first time in a long time, he felt hope, not a fleeting thrill, but a steady, quiet hope that he could truly change. The hall slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Chips clattered softly, cards shuffled quietly, and the murmurs of the crowd resumed. But Ethan no longer felt part of the chaos. He had stepped outside of it, standing in a moment of clarity and purpose. The night had started as another gamble, another reckless adventure, but it had transformed into something much greater, a chance for redemption, self-discovery, and the beginning of a new life. As he left the table and stepped into the cool night air, Ethan felt the weight of his past, but also the lightness of new possibilities. He had made mistakes, but he had also learned, and for the first time he felt ready to face the consequences of his actions with honesty and courage. Leanne watched him leave with a quiet smile, knowing that the man who had stumbled into the hall drunk and reckless had now taken the first true step toward change. Ethan walked down the empty streets, the moonlight casting soft silver shadows on the ground. The town, which had seemed so small and ordinary before, now felt full of potential. He realized that the real game had only just begun. The game of life, of making choices, of rebuilding trust and honor, and of living in a way that honored the lessons he had almost forgotten. And in that quiet night, with the cool wind brushing his face, Ethan felt the stirring of a new beginning. The consequences of his actions were clear, the path ahead uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt capable of facing it all. Ethan stepped out of the gambling hall into the cool night air. The streets of the small town were quiet now, lit only by the soft glow of lanterns swinging gently in the evening breeze. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing deeply, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. The city had felt chaotic and alive inside the hall, but now, in the stillness, he realized how much had changed in just a few short hours. His mind, once clouded by drink and carelessness, was now clear. The night's events had awakened something inside him, a sense of purpose and the first stirrings of hope. He walked slowly through the streets, recalling every moment of the game, every glance from Leanne, every word she had spoken that carried his mother's voice. He could feel the weight of her quiet wisdom still pressing gently on his conscience. For years he had avoided responsibility, thinking that life was something to escape from, not engage with. But now he understood something important. Life was not about running or hiding. It was about facing what came your way and choosing to act with honesty and courage. Ethan reached the small wooden bridge at the edge of town, the river below reflecting the moonlight in soft ripples. He stopped and looked into the water, seeing his own reflection staring back at him. The man he saw was rough, worn, and marked by years of poor decisions. Yet beneath the surface, there was a spark of change, a spark of life that had not been extinguished despite all his mistakes. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where he could be responsible, present, and true to himself. Meanwhile, Leanne had left the gambling hall a short time earlier, returning to the small inn where her family was staying. She could not stop thinking about the man she had just faced across the poker table. Ethan had been reckless, loud, and careless, yet in that moment when she had spoken, she had seen something extraordinary happen. The words of his mother, carried by her voice, had awakened him in an instant. She had not intended to control him or shame him, but she had sparked a moment of clarity that no one else could have created. Leon felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had witnessed the beginning of someone's true change. Back on the bridge, Ethan reflected on what had happened. The chips he had returned to the table, the apologies he had made, the respect he had shown, all of these actions had been small, yet they carried immense weight in his mind. For years he had lived without considering the consequences of his choices, but now he understood that even small actions could lead to meaningful change. He realized that integrity, honesty, and courage were far more valuable than any amount of money or fleeting excitement. Ethan continued to walk through the quiet streets, thinking about the townspeople who had watched the events unfold. Some had been skeptical, some had been amused, but all had witnessed a transformation, a man stepping out of recklessness and into clarity. It was a subtle change, perhaps unnoticed by many, yet profoundly important to Ethan himself. He understood that this night marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which he could rebuild not only his life but also his understanding of himself and the world. He thought about Leanne again, wondering if she would remember him after tonight. She had been the catalyst for his awakening, a mirror reflecting the truth he had been avoiding. Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for her courage and insight. She had challenged him without confrontation, guided him without judgment, and reminded him of his humanity in a way that no one else had been able to do. For the first time, Ethan felt that connections with others could be meaningful, even if fragile, and that trust and respect were far more valuable than any winnings at a table. Ethan eventually reached the edge of the town, where the road stretched out toward the mountains. The stars above were bright, scattered across the night sky like tiny sparks of hope. He paused for a moment, thinking about the life he had left behind, the mistakes, the poor choices, and the years of wandering without purpose. And yet he felt no despair. Instead, he felt the quiet determination to move forward, to learn from his past, and to take responsibility for his actions. The night had shown him that change was possible, even after years of carelessness and avoidance. The following days were different for Ethan. He found a small room in the town, a place where he could stay without being a burden to anyone. He took small jobs helping merchants carry goods, assisting with repairs, and performing honest work that he had long avoided. The townspeople noticed the change in him. The once loud and reckless man was now quiet, focused, and respectful. Some were surprised, others skeptical, but all could see that Ethan had begun to transform. He felt pride in the simple tasks, understanding that rebuilding life started with small, consistent actions. One morning, Ethan returned to the gambling hall, not to play, but to speak with the dealer and the other players. He apologized for his past behavior, acknowledging the recklessness that had brought chaos into their hall. He offered a small portion of his earnings from his honest work as a gesture of goodwill. The dealer, an older man with a kind face, nodded slowly. "It takes courage to see yourself clearly and act on it," he said. "You've started something tonight that matters far more than winning or losing." Leanne visited the hall a few days later, and Ethan saw her quietly observing the scene. Their eyes met, and a small smile passed between them. There was no need for words. Both understood the significance of the night that had changed everything. Ethan had been transformed, not by luck, not by chance, but by a combination of insight, courage, and guidance that had reached him when he needed it most. Ethan spent time reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He realized that life was a series of choices, and every action carried consequences. Recklessness might bring temporary excitement, but clarity and honesty brought lasting fulfillment. He began writing down his thoughts, creating a small journal to record his experiences and the steps he was taking to change. The act of reflection helped him remain accountable, reminding him daily of the path he had chosen. Over the next weeks, Ethan became known in the town not as the reckless outlaw, but as someone striving to live with integrity. He helped neighbors, assisted in the local school, and became a quiet mentor to younger men who had once been tempted by gambling and recklessness. He shared the lessons he had learned, though carefully and gently, understanding that true change could only happen when people were ready to accept it for themselves. Leanne and Ethan met several times in the town, often exchanging quiet conversations about life, choices, and responsibility. They never spoke of the game in the hall, but the memory of that night remained a shared understanding between them. Leanne admired the progress Ethan had made, and Ethan found in her a quiet friendship that encouraged his continued growth. The bond between them was not built on excitement or risk, but on mutual respect, reflection, and the understanding of what it meant to confront oneself honestly. Months later, Ethan stood once again on the bridge at the edge of town, looking at the river beneath him. The water reflected the morning sun, shimmering like scattered diamonds. He thought about how far he had come since that night in the gambling hall. The night that had started with chaos, recklessness, and risk, but had ended with clarity, awareness, and the first steps toward meaningful change. He realized that life was not about running from mistakes, but about facing them, learning from them, and moving forward with honesty. Ethan smiled softly, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent from his life for many years. The town, once just a temporary stop in his wandering life, had become a place of renewal. He had been given a chance to rebuild, to regain his sense of self, and to create connections that mattered. And although the road ahead was long and uncertain, he knew he was ready to face it, one step at a time, with clarity, courage, and integrity. In the quiet of the morning, Ethan thought of Leanne again, silently thanking her for the role she had played in his awakening. Her courage, her insight, and her willingness to speak the truth had unlocked something inside him that no amount of chance or luck could have achieved. And as he walked back into the town, ready to continue his life of reflection, work, and honesty, he knew that the lessons of that night would stay with him forever. Ethan's story became quietly known throughout the town, not as a tale of gambling or recklessness, but as a story of change, courage, and the power of seeing oneself clearly. Children listened to the older townspeople recount the events, learning that even those who had gone astray could find a way back through honesty, reflection, and action. Ethan lived each day with purpose, remembering the moment that had changed everything, the moment when a stranger's words had reminded him of his mother's wisdom, and when he had chosen to act with integrity rather than recklessness. And in the years that followed, Ethan never forgot the lessons of that night. He continued to walk the path of responsibility, building connections, helping others, and striving to live with honesty. The game had been just the beginning, a catalyst for transformation, a reminder that life was not about winning or losing, but about seeing oneself clearly and choosing to act with courage and purpose.